Renee Harrison is a member of the Navajo tribe from Shiprock, New Mexico. She is the 7th child of 14 children from Shiprock. It is from past memories of homelessness, despair, and the feelings of hopelessness that have given her the desire to help others. And it is the strength and love of her 6 children that she survived the 21 years of domestic violence while living on the Navajo reservation. So let's give it up for Renee Harris.
I had to get some water so I don't choke on my words here. So I don't know how many of you here were here last year when I gave the presentations. And I had my 4 sisters with me who helped me. But this year, I sort of a little bit wanted to continue, but I'll have a lot of the same information because this year I was a different place in my life. And so the topic is about healing. And so if you notice on your table, I put some little cards that says Safe Ground. And you can put them anywhere you want. And when I go through my presentation, you might hear me say that word a couple of times. And it has to do with safe ground of getting to safety. As domestic violence we really need that. And then I also put some pens because I do work at the Urban Indian Center in Salt Lake, and I put down some business cards. So how I'd like to start is there is some sticky notes on your tables and the pens. So what I would like is for you to define healing. What does healing mean to you? And when we get completed with this presentation, we're going to put your notes up on the picture board here that I drew. But let me tell you that I can't take all the credit because my grandchildren colored the picture. They are very talented. So the pictures that you see along the way is a brief history. So before I start, I'm going to tell you one thing about this picture. So one thing about this picture is that my life through this time, it pretty well just went like this, okay? A little bit of bumps, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then the big part just sort of went that way. I'm just telling you that because when I started getting sexually abused, it's like time stopped. I couldn't move forward. I couldn't think of the future. And so it was one step at a time, even a minute at a time. And I could not even look at the future until there's a part where I will tell you about how I had big changes in my life. So I had a suggestion this week, and the suggestion was, why don't you just read that presentation and pretty much you'll get done really fast, and then you won't go overtime. So a lot of it I'm going to read. And I'm going to compromise with that person. As I begin my presentation today, you will see that I am a visual learner. I did not know this until I was in graduate school. I learn best by looking at what I see, whether it's in pictures, videos, or listening, or by observation. And I like to draw simple things that I see in my mind. Like I said, this past week it was suggested to me maybe I should be reading my story so I wouldn't go over time. And when that person said that to me, for a second, I just became confused and I just didn't know how I could do that, just reading. I have always had pictures in my mind since I was a child. As a child, the pictures started out as sexual abuse I had suffered, of nightmares, and for years I could never get rid of those scenes of abuse, of domestic violence in my mind. As much as I kept myself busy, it was always there. Every day I would just see that in my mind. So like I said, I would like you to define what healing is for you. Healing is different for everyone. One day I was asked in one of my graduate classes to help with a presentation and to tell my classmates part of my story. The word healing came up and I became familiar with that word. It is a word I do not take lightly because through my life I did not know the meaning of healing except maybe the doctor's definition, or as later in my life when spirituality came up. Healing was just not there for me. I didn't even think about that word because I was just in so much trauma that it didn't occur to me that's how I could get better. And I didn't even think I was anywhere where I needed to get better. So let me introduce you to a young lady, a little girl you might be familiar with through your acquaintance, your work, your agency, or she could be someone you barely met and you didn't recognize her. That little girl is the story that you're going to hear about. We'll start about telling you a little bit about how trauma entered her life. Renee was born in Ignacio, Colorado. Birth records does not show she was born in a hospital, but that she might have been born on the way. She has 13 brothers and sisters. Both parents were Navajos and were from the area of Cortez, Colorado. Her family traveled around a lot due to the father's employment, and oftentimes they would work as field workers, among other jobs. Many trips would be made to Ignacio, Colorado, visiting siblings who attended boarding school there, and to Cortez, Colorado, in that area. She remembers living in Tooele, Utah, as a small child with her siblings. Her mother decided to move to Shiprock, New Mexico, on the Navajo reservation after leaving my father. Possibly she was about the age of 5. Once moving to Shiprock at the age of 6 years, she was put in a government boarding school along with other brothers and sisters. She was in the 2nd grade. Renee was placed in dorm 2, where that age group were placed. There were about 12 dormitories. Her younger sister was in dorm 1 next door. Dorm life was uneventful due to the routine of it all. Each day was basically the same as rising by the bell and going to dinner by the bell, with lunch in between, walking a small distance to the dining hall. Each morning, children were lined up to get their bundle of clothing for the day, given to them from a small window for each child to receive. No choice was given of what they wore, but all accessories were in a bundle wrapped in a towel with socks, undies, and an outfit for the day. Then showers. And they all took turns in the shower room with no shower curtain provided. Then it was off to get their hair braided, and then off to breakfast and to classes. For many of us, our thoughts were of our families and why were we left there. We had dorm mates who took care of us the best we could, but with so many children, we did not have that individual care we craved for. Children took care of children. Memories here are of my mouth being washed with soap, getting hit with a ruler on my hands for whatever reason, and being sent to the sick room for sicknesses I had. Further memories are of being able to play with my sister from dorm 1 when all the children were sent out to play on swings, making dirt piles, or playing for whatever time we had, then sent back to the dorm.
Renee, did you want the slides showing?
No, we're fine here. Nights for me were hard, nightmares. I was a sleepwalker and would end up outside the dorms late at night. I often wet the bed, but would sneak, clean sheets, remake my bed, and hide the soiled sheets. I was told by other children there were monsters hiding under the dorm that would come out at night. These are the times I felt abandoned, feeling alone, and it was frightening. Where was my mother? By then, our father was not with us. Here I only talk about sad times because these were my memories. I think it is because as children we did not have that family environment. We began to learn to follow orders, have routines, and our minds are having these learned experiences that sometimes set our way of life that became normal for us. In boarding school, I was not taught the traditions of our Navajo ways. I was taught the Navajo language. I was not taught the Navajo language. I did not attend ceremonies, or was it explained to me that I needed to learn as a young child. It was explained to me that as a female, that I just needed to follow orders. So if you see the chart there, that's a picture of my mother. That's the hogan that we all lived in, and the boarding school with the swings. So this is where you can so it's going to say Renee's clan, and you might hear a little Utah accent in there. Okay, there. So I will introduce myself. Yat She Renee Harrison Yansha. Ma'adeshgishni do senakadi. Bashishchin nakaidene do hashish dashanele. Hello, my name is Renee Harrison. I am of Cody Pass people, born for the Clump Tree People clan. The Mexican clan are my maternal grandfather's clan, and the Mud clan people are my maternal grandfather's clan. Any relations out there? And so these are the things that I was not taught as a young child. But later in life, I began to learn that this is something that I really wanted to learn, was my traditions. So this is a little bit about the Indian Placement Program. I became a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that year when I turned 8 years old. My earliest memories were of my mother walking us on Sunday mornings to church, a school building that later on was chosen for a church where we attended our church services. I didn't know it then, but my mother had talked to LDS Social Services about putting us on the Indian Placement Program. I did not know how this came about. Since I was 8 years old, I was baptized that summer. My memories are vague in how I became a part of this program. One of the requirements was to be baptized, get permission from a parent, and then you are eligible to be in the program. From the time I entered the 3rd grade up until I graduated from high school, I had been there in 3 foster homes. The first foster home I lasted 4 months, and I was just 8 years old because the family said I was so unhappy. The second family, I was there from 3rd grade until a junior in high school. This took a lot of effort on their part because of all the problems they thought that I had. Towards the end, because I had too many things wrong, I was sent to another family for my senior year in high school. It was told to me that they had regretted having me there. I was not a bad child. I made mistakes that were the result of my upbringing, and at times I acted out in subtle ways that made sense to me. One big point to all of this was I never told anyone about my secrets of sexual abuse or about what happened to me once I went home for the summer. The sexual abuse, the physical abuse, and the great fear I had if anyone found out. When I think about these times, I think about I was not really a bad kid. And I would do little things that irritated them, like I felt isolated. I would isolate myself. I would get a can of soup and heat it up and go down in the room and just have a lot of solitude. And that's what I really like to do. And a lot of these behaviors was a result of sexual abuse and the behaviors that you yourself don't even notice that you're doing. When the abuse began, my world changed along with my safety and my innocence of how I looked at the world. For years, I could not look at things as beautiful or even at myself. Even now, it is hard to look in the mirror and say that I am beautiful. I am still in the healing process as much as I want to say I am better. It is not that easy to get over these experiences. At this point in my life, I also could not see the happy moments of my youth. All had disappeared in that act of being sexually abused. Memories of trauma, of hating myself, and the anger I felt at the world. From that point, it all was a pretend world. If no one knew what happened, I could pretend I was fine. It was like having a split personality. The evilness I felt inside and the little Navajo girl outside that for many years forgot about the terrorized little girl inside and again pretended that she did not exist. There is no simple way to put down of what happened to me as a 9-year-old child. I will talk frankly about this because this is what happened. It is not a pretty picture, but it needs to be said because this was the beginning of the end for her as a child and who became the person she hated as an adult. This part I'm going to tell you about because it tells the story of what happened when a child is sodomized, raped, sexually abused. Their life changes, their body changes. It affects their minds in a way that they are different people and yet their lives must move on. Their trauma is so great. Telling this story will help others, hopefully, for us as practitioners, as social workers, clinicians, family members, and so forth. Let's try to understand just a portion of what they go through. It might get a little explicit, so my point is here is not to re-traumatize anybody, or if you feel like you need to leave, I can understand. This is her speaking as an adult as she remembers the events of this day and how it affected her life. There was no hollering, running, or resistance from this act of rape that happened to me, or would there be as I continued my life in believing you just do not acknowledge what is happening to you. You disassociate yourself from all that is happening, so life would go on. I had behaviors that were taught because of its secrets, the trauma of the act and the sheer terror I felt if I did not comply. I would learn that this is what I am supposed to do with instructions given to me as I was led to what I always call that closet. I was instructed to lay down in precisely in what position, my face to the floor. As I would learn later, this was a ritual from my perpetrator. I did not know what was to happen to me in those moments. I soon found out I would be penetrated from behind with a force that was as painful as I was whispered not to tell anyone, but to lay still and not say a word. It was the way he said those words, in a way that was secretive and forceful at the same time, but also in a very soft voice, as though the softness of the tone would entice me more to comply. Not completely understanding, I swore inwardly to secrecy, because as a child I was bound by those words not to say a word. As he covered his hand with my mouth, I believe this was a game I had not totally understood. Was it the game of hide and seek that we played almost daily, in which we ran to hide, and this must be a secret place I so trustingly was led to, this dark and secret place? Was I so special I was given the most secret place to hide? What innocence I had to believe this. Maybe I was truly loved by my mother. If she showed him affection, he was in some way transferring that affection to me by making me feel special. In those moments, you are in sheer terror. You are not thinking yet, hoping that some kind of intervention would take place. Where are my other siblings to come and save me? Maybe somebody will come in the house and notice me so I don't so I can go back outside to play. Questions in an instant that were banished because there is no one to save you. You are alone with this person who is hurting you, and there is nothing you can do, and you are paralyzed and completely under his control. We only had one closet filled with clothes, belongings that were there for whatever reason my mother had for placing her items there. I would have dreams of that closet for years, of it filled with my mother's clothes, and I would pick out whatever would fit me as a grown-up in these dreams. Those dreams were not of abuse, but of a beginning of looking deeper into my thoughts of what happened to me, and yet the fear of seeing more, which was too painful at the time. I would search for clothes and the different outfits as though they were a part of my mother, who I had despised and hated for not taking care of me in those moments I needed her. I had tried so hard not to be like her or even look like her, but in my later years, I began to see that I looked much like her, which on occasion I would closely examine and thought myself as ugly and certainly not deserving of anything, especially love. My eyes, my features, and this became difficult for me to acknowledge and could not change. These are memories that continues to be a reality on a daily basis, but as I continue on my life, the memories come far between, but still clearly visible as the healing process continues, and I continue on for the rest of my life. You might say, how could this happen to a small child? And nothing was done. No intervention, no law enforcement, or was anyone sentenced to this crime. I remember being led to that only closet in this house, measuring about 3 feet long and approximately 9 feet long. This would be a place I dreaded as a child. For years as I put this experience in the back of my mind, I would not begin to fully understand how being sodomized could affect my whole life, both psychologically, physically, and even spiritually. Even at times I write in the third person because I do not acknowledge that this is my experience, this was my life. I believe it is an unconscious thing that I do because of the trauma of it all. I see myself there as a little girl I had wanted to protect, but yet could not because of the enormity of the experience and my immaturity, innocence, and trusting soul that I was. And underneath it all, I had to also pretend that no one had harmed me, and I kept that secret deep inside because of the shame that I felt because I was told to. Memories is a powerful thing. It can be retrieved through our thoughts and be kept in a secure place for years. My memories were repressed for years. They say that this is a lot because of traumatic events that happen to you, or because of age, or it's the passing of years that lets us forget those experiences. I had tried to remember joyful moments, but it has been hard because of my disassociation with many events I chose to repress when my mind would not take me to those earlier experiences. Disassociation was a survival technique for me. So painful were experiences that if I repeated it, I could go into the world, to a different world. I could pretend I was once again in the desert sun playing happily with siblings, or those summers by the river, safe from the world. Disassociation, as I have said, was a protective mechanism that would take me to anywhere that I wanted to go. It could be to the fantasy world. It could be back to where I was being abused, But in those moments of being raped, I always went to places where I felt safe. As an adult, I could be a child again with my own children as I would learn to swing, color coloring books, go for walks with them, yet never growing old psychologically. But physically, my body kept in time with the passing of years. Still, as age began to sneak up on me emotionally, I continued to be that 9-year-old child. Even as a teenager, I was still stuck in that world of abuse, whether it was at home with my mom, being hit by my stepfather, or the physical abuse that began as confrontations began to be between myself and that perpetrator. And later in my married life, as domestic violence began to occur as an adult, I was forever evolving. It was a forever evolving circle that seemed to have no end, and I remained trapped in that cycle. Domestic violence, as we know it now, is not all about domestic dispute at the moment. It happens, but can become a cycle that continues if not recognized. Domestic violence for me started as a child inside our home, and the circumstances surrounding those events set a cycle that would continue all my life. This violence I could see outside myself in a world I could not control, and became as violent as you could imagine. Domestic violence has always existed in my mind and slowly turned into historical trauma. It is the memory of this abuse that has never left my thoughts and always controlled my mind in the direction my life went. As a child, I observed it, lived it, and was controlled by it. It was something I could never ever get rid of because of the secrets that lay there in my brain and throughout my body as my whole being became infected with it. It was through my eyes that I saw my world in an obscure way. For many might say this became normal for me. As I lived in my head, I observed I could trust no one. As a child of 9, being sodomized entered my body with a fierce blow, a penetration which imposed trauma, traveling through every cell and emotion I had. It was the semen that wet my legs and entered my most innocent parts, and I realized years later that it was then that I became dirty and unclean, never erased from my body or my mind. As a child, you do not think this way, only that you were hurt and attacked viciously as you go further within yourself in order to feel, not to feel that shame. My outside world became less valued, less joyful, yet more observant in how I might not let this happen again. Each act of sexual abuse became a violation of my thoughts and emotions of what direction it took me. A continuous movement reminding me that I could never be able to sit still, watching every movement and observing those around me. I was quick to be on my feet, and as I became older, my mind was always busy with thoughts of how I might run to safe ground. So how did I continue to have a life of abuse, violence, and obscurity? Secrets that were not told and secrets I myself had to put away on a shelf I could never revisit. Yet I kept going back to that shelf over and over in my mind, a never-ending, ceasing picture, and pictures clouding my judgment throughout my life. So domestic violence on the res. That was a hard one. It started out subtle without me realizing that I would end up in this life of abuse, what they call domestic violence, but a violence so violent that thoughts of even hurting myself became apparent at times when the abuser became so violent by my husband. I did not realize it at the time, but what they call red flags should have come up for me in many of those instances. They did not. At that time, my world was not as guarded as I once thought. I was just drifting, a place where I believe I was mellowing out for me, and that maybe the abuse had finally stopped, and that I had some kind of control of my life. My thoughts had drifted away into clouds as I began a relationship that didn't contain love or even a sense of companionship that one should have when thinking of marriage. I just existed, moving along, one step at a time. And I would think, what am I thinking? What was I thinking? What drove you to this kind of relationship when you could just have left? The storybook doesn't go like that when you are in a spot in your life that doesn't even send signals to your brain that you are in danger. I was tired. I needed to rest. Of all the years of abuse, I had thought I found a way out of all this chaos that has surrounded me. I was nearly 21, old enough by now to make my own decisions, yet psychologically and mentally, I was still that 9-year-old child that I hadn't moved on. So many feelings had passed since the time I had been in that closet to where I might be able to move on. It was a step-by-step existence, a day-to-day decision-making life. No future existed for me, or decisions could be made ahead of time. That would come later in life, much later, when I decided to leave, and even that took planning. So let me tell you a little bit how it was to be on the reservation. We have been isolated, as you can see the picture, for years. There was no electricity or running water. Our income, I would say, was about $400 a month. That wasn't much when I think of it now, but back then I always thought, wow, $400 a month? So once a month we would go from where we lived in Sanasti, New Mexico, into Shiprock. And once a month we would go get our supplies. In an area where we were so isolated, there was nobody that lived around us. And so the winter months, we pretty much spent by ourselves, me and the children. And when we went into Shiprock once a month, we got everything that I thought we needed. Food, books at the flea market to read, gobs and gobs of books we read. But by the middle of the month, the food would run out, and we would get commodities. And that was our life for many years on a daily basis. The abuse was tremendous. If you didn't heat up the coffee enough, you'd get hit. If dinner wasn't on the table, you'd get hit. You try to run, where were you going? And it was almost like you were being captive there on the reservation. There was no police, no law enforcement. One instance, that I got hit pretty bad, and I ran, and I did call the police, but they never showed up until the next day. An abuser will hit you any way, anyhow, even if you're pregnant, which that happened. My birth control was taken away, and marital rape is a real thing. All of these instances that I endured while we lived on the reservation, it had been 20 years of marriage when I thought my thoughts of leaving came into my mind. It was not a conscious thought or even an irrational or even spontaneous thought. Living on the Navajo reservation for 12 years out of 20 had taken a toll on me that I couldn't imagine looking back once I had left. One cannot imagine how I had wanted to leave years earlier, but I couldn't understand my rationale of staying, but only to say that I believe that through my religious upbringing, I had to fight to the end. I had to endure to the end. I had to save that one soul which guarantee eternal existence in the hereafter. That one soul certainly wasn't me. So my mind and my thinking was obscure. My thinking wasn't normal because of the events of my earlier childhood. I would sacrifice myself for the sake of my husband. If I could do this, I would be the one person that could get my family to heaven, and we would be eternally together. These thoughts were the thoughts that kept me in this relationship, and this was my mindset. As I lived on the Navajo reservation, I had thought I could never leave, because where would I go? Who could I trust, and above all, who would take me and my children, as I thought there was no safe place ever? My belief in myself through those years had diminished to almost nothing. I still existed. In the end, it began to be the fear that kept me there. And finally, it was the fear that made me leave. Sometimes it's hard to understand why domestic victims stay. You don't know what's going on, especially when a death happens or an incident on the Navajo reservation happens, and you think, well, why didn't they leave? What happened? So after all those years, we left. It was sort of like outsmarting the guy. You knew you were smart. And it was a teacher who came out to the reservation, and she said, Renee, what the hell are you doing out here? You're a smart lady. What's going on? And then it just like a bolt of lightning that hit my mind. And I thought, yeah, what the hell am I doing out here? And so I thought, I have to plan how to get out of here. And it was through education. I said, why don't we go back to school, and they're going to pay us? I mean, with $400 a month, and all of a sudden a scholarship, wow. He said, okay, let's go. So we went to Window Rock and applied for a Navajo scholarship, and they gave it to us. So we packed everything, and all those days I kept thinking, I hope he doesn't change his mind. Let's just keep going. Let's just keep packing. And we ended up at Highlands University in Santa Fe, up above Santa Fe. Well, I made it through the year, but he certainly didn't. And I thought, oh, the abuse has finally stopped. But I'm going to tell you This is the last time he ever hit me. He's going to kill me. Terrifying screams came from my thoughts. I could not yell or scream my words out as he came towards me. I had been silent for so long that I didn't even have a voice. And I began to run again, but this time my dreams were a reality. I felt him grab me as he began to punch me over and over. I fell into the glass table that I had always treasured, the only new piece of furniture I bought to make our living space grand. The chrome chair was no longer a piece of furniture to sit upon, but a weapon to be pounded on me over and over again and again. I began to go within myself as I had so many times when these patterns of his beatings began to happen. I could hear the children echoing screams as they saw their mother being beaten so many times before. No amount or no voices loud enough could reach him to stop. He was in his own world of hatred, anger, and a soul poisoned by whatever haunted him through his life. I had begun to transfer my thoughts to another world as it had become normal for me, flying beyond now broken bones and the tattered body that belonged to me. I had to save myself now. I had to take the beating as the chrome chair continued to pound my head over and over. For some reason, I did not feel the pain. This would come later as I had to return to my world I had begun to hate. I forced myself to look around, down to the floor, imagining I was not there. I was good at this, you know. Images of days as a child when I had once been innocent often came to my mind. If I really could, I would trance myself there, free again, as that was part of me. But this, he had taken my spirit, beaten me violently, as I would believe I could never return to my children, whether it would be by death or psychologically driven into insanity. I would always know when it was time to escape, finding an opening as I waited for that moment when his rage had begun to fill him with confusion. I knew those moments and I could take advantage of those seconds I could run. It was then that I got that adrenaline, that opening to run. Those moments seemed to be a reaction, a survival moment of saving myself. I would always run as fast as I could, whether it was in the city, out in the open desert, or in the gullies as I raced for safety. I could have won the Olympics. This day I ran for the door, not looking back, but forward to safe ground. Once I felt that second of safety, I glanced back and I was alone as I walked to wherever that safe place was. My breathing seemed to always slow down in those moments of thinking, how could I escape? How could I could hear echoes of people gathering, my children crying, yet I needed to get to safety. I walked faster and faster, and I made it around the block. When I returned, the police were there, and my husband was in handcuffs as he was taken into jail. I still did not feel safe. Maybe in the back of my mind, I knew this was a cycle, that he would be back again. I would get hit again, and no amount of jail bars could ever keep him away from me. I was taken to the hospital, and I would always say I was fine. And they would always say, well, if you feel like throwing up, or you feel like, the pain is too great, and they bandage you up, and then you go home, and then you have to return because of the concussions that you had received. Thoughts filled my mind for the first time that I needed to leave. Yet how could I? The same patterns began to emerge of surviving just that one day, not really looking at the future, but this was somehow different. It was the fact that he could have killed me. For the first time, I called my older sister and she told me to leave. It was as though I needed that permission to leave. Soon after, I left with my children. It is not easy to leave domestic violence. For me, it was hard after I left with my children. After being in control all my life, I found it confusing. Much later, my children told me that it was good that we had left. Again, it is not easy to leave. I soon found ourselves without rules. We ate what we wanted. We did not clean. There began to be no order in our lives. And at the beginning, it was a lot of fun because nobody told us what to do anymore. But there was the other side. I slept by the door each night on the floor, fully clothed with my shoes on, ready to run, making sure all the windows were shut and locked before the children went to bed. I slept in the bathtub to find some sort of safety. And there was the anger I began to feel that scared me because I had not let out that anger for what had happened to me during my life. I threw dishes as my other sisters can testify to you. I had not taken care of myself during those years. I lost many teeth and did not take care of my health. I was not allowed many things while I was in that relationship: birth control, underwear, food, bare necessities that we needed. Many things I did not have for me or for my children. We have been isolated for so long, I began to think I would never make it out. But we did. And we moved to Salt Lake City. And this is where the spirituality came in, because I began to pray and I felt like that's where we were told to leave. And things began to get better. You can see all of the different things here when you are going through trauma that you see a list in, but you can also see what healing can look like. So, healing. So from her story through her life, and she can see the healing, I want you to raise your hand and tell me, what did you see in her and why was she able to get from A to B? Why am I still here? What helped her?
Your spirit.
Oh.
Wow. You have coping skills, the strength to cope.
Coping skills. What do you see in your clients or whoever you're working with when they're going through trauma?
Courage. Hope for the future.
But she didn't. Okay, but she didn't see these. You know, one step at a time, getting from there to there. she didn't see all of this. She didn't say, oh, I'm going to get my master's, or oh, I'm going to work on my PhD. Oh, I'm going to have a wonderful life. She didn't see those things. So, again, it was the secrets that prevented her from moving forward. She was passive, disassociation, a lot of neglect of not being supervised. So here I have a list of things that these also that you brought to the table. She has a lot of humor. She can be funny. She loves arts and crafts that kept her so busy all the time. She had her family, she had her daughters, and it was there toward the, a time where her daughters took care of her. When she went to Salt Lake, Mom, you need to fix your hair. Mom, let's put on some makeup. If you're going to school, we better check everything about you because I don't think you're going to last out there. So I began to improve myself in that way through my daughters. They helped me. Health-wise, a lot of issues with health come up with your clients. And for me, diabetes, PTSD, anxiety, all those diagnoses that you see, well, where do they come from? A lot of it comes from trauma. How they grew up, relationships, behaviors. If you do an assessment on a client, you see all those things, evaluations, and you think, well, how can we help? And so that's why I went back to school and I got my degree and I started doing counseling at the Indian Urban Center. But one of the biggest things that helped me was getting therapy for myself. And also talking about my experiences. That has been my healing, of letting that out so that new things can come in and new behaviors and a new person. I'm not there because I can see different little things in myself that I need to improve on. And my daughters can tell me that too. So the Indian Urban Center is where I work. I gave you little cards. I am the behavioral health specialist. Currently, we are doing a grant on safety relationship, and this is really a passion for me because it's about letting our young people know that as young teenagers, they can get in a safer relationships. They can be involved with their friends in a healthy way. And so we'll be beginning classes on those to prevent domestic violence, sexual abuse, sexual violence, and all those kind of things. So anybody has any questions?
I got a question. So during that 20-year span or 12-year span, what was it that kept you strong? Because to me, you'd have to be a strong person.
To me, I think it was my children. My children were there every day for me because they kept me busy. I needed to feed them. I needed to care for them. I needed their love, and they loved me. And I want to also mention that I did work at the Home for Women and Children after I had left, and that's where I had worked. And I found out And it's a little bit sad because I didn't know there was a shelter when I was going through this, a women's shelter, because I always felt like I didn't have anywhere to go. I would go to my mom's house, but that only lasted a day and then I had to head home. But you know, the shelter, even though that I knew that they had the police, they had safety, they had classes there, I knew all that, but I couldn't comprehend that because I was still so much in my trauma. I didn't know how to make myself get better. I wasn't one of those people. I was just there to get the information. And it turned out I was one of those victims, but I just denied it. I didn't want to recognize it. And in a way I learned, but not in the way that I should have learned, that maybe I should have took those classes and said, oh, this is a cycle of violence? Was that what I was in? I didn't recognize all those things. And when I moved away and I went to Salt Lake, it was all about paying the rent, making food on the table, taking care of the children. So none of that therapy that I needed or thought that would help me, I didn't do. And maybe it was because I wasn't ready for somebody to tell me, hey, you need help. So when I was in the PhD program, everything was screwed up there because it was all about privilege, all about them telling you what to do. And I thought through those years I finally got my voice back. But when I started my 3 years into my PhD program, I lost my voice because they were telling me what to do. The monsters from under the dorms came out. The professors hitting my hands with rulers and washing my mouth out with soap because I wanted to do my PhD in a way that was helpful and get a lot of research from outside, from Native Americans. Who were these researchers that I wanted to come and help me with my domestic violence dissertation? I wasn't allowed to do that. And I was told that you can't go against the university because you are never ever going to win, Renee. And I lost my voice and I couldn't say anything. And I really believe that I need to be in a safe place. I need to be in those safe surroundings, and it wasn't there for me anymore. So you learn that to take care of yourself. For me, it wasn't having the PhD. It sort of was a way, you know, but it was important for me. But learning was so important because I could go in that world of learning and I didn't have to deal with this. I could do my writings and it was like disassociation myself, my writings, my research, and then I didn't have to think about all this and healing. But you know, when I got to the point where I couldn't even concentrate, when I started having triggers and anger and flashbacks, everything that started coming up, I thought, there's something wrong with me. So I went to therapy, finally all through this. And it actually helped. So is there anything else that could be helpful?
I was wondering, so did your mother experience domestic violence herself?
My mother, her parents died when she was about really young, and she lived right out on the isolated part of the reservation. And so when both of her parents died, she went to live with her grandmother. And she would tell me that her grandmother was really mean. So I suspect, yes, that there was abuse there, maybe, some way. I remember she told me that, when you go to the bathroom and you get your roll of tissue that comes out, she was only allowed 4 blocks of those tissue. And us, we're just rolling it out. Those kind of little things. And she grew up with her grandma taking care of her, so she didn't really have parents. She actually died a few years ago, and before she died, one thing that I can write down on the healing, and it's a big one, is forgiveness. So what I'd like you to do is take your little sticky notes, the one that you put your definitions, and you can take them up and put them up, and then different people can read. These are your definitions. So I appreciate all of you guys coming, and while you're doing that, I think I'm going to do it right, and you're going to see pictures from when I got to go live in Washington, D.C. with my daughter, and how special those learning experiences were. Can help? Let's see. It's a slideshow. On the Today Show. Oh, he kissed me on the cheek. And my daughter can witness that. My grandson, who just graduated. Oh, the White House. She got her master's. And one of my daughter who's here also got her master's. Oh, he was a cutie. Aren't they cuties? This is when I made a trip cross country from Washington, D.C. to Salt Lake. And my sisters and my brother. Safe ground. So safe ground is something that I would mention because it's a safe place, and I wish they would have this sign in front of the chapter houses, in front of our agencies, different places that people would know that that's where you can go, victims could go to know that that's where their safe ground of safety. And maybe someday we can do that. Appreciate all of you for being here and taking this time to listen.